The vote counter on the wall turns red before I even sit down. 41 votes against Earth, 6 in favor. I stop in the doorway of the council chamber with a cup of station coffee still burning my hand, and I watch the number lock in, and I understand that something has ended before I even had the chance to argue for it. My name is Ethan Cole. I am the junior aide to the human ambassador on Council Station Meridian, which is a fancy way of saying I carry files and I remember things nobody else wants to remember. Right now, what I remember is that 3 hours ago, Ambassador Laura Bennett told me this vote was a formality, a rubber stamp, nothing to worry about. She was wrong. The chamber is a ring of light and glass, 47 species arranged by seniority, humanity tucked near the back where the newest members always sit. Speaker Thelvorin, tall and pale and precise in every motion, folds his 6 fingers together and looks down at our small delegation with an expression I have learned to recognize. It is the expression of someone delivering bad news while pretending it is good news for everyone. The colony charter for the world designated Earth Verdance, he says, granted under provisional status 11 years ago, is hereby revoked. The technical violation cited was minor. The vote was not. Laura does not stand. She has been in this chamber longer than I have been alive, and she knows that standing now would look like begging. Instead, she asks one question, flat and quiet. The kind of quiet that used to scare people back on Earth before it ever got the chance to scare anyone up here. On what technical violation? A registration discrepancy in your colonial administrative filings, Thelvorin says. 11 years old, long since corrected, but valid grounds under Council Statute 4-12. I do the math before he finishes the sentence. Statute 4-12 has never once been invoked against a founding species, and it has been invoked against us within a decade of admission. 40,000 human colonists on Verdance just lost the legal right to the world they built with their own hands, over a filing error that every species in this room has committed 100 times worse, and never answered for. Laura reaches over and closes my hand around my coffee cup before I realize I have started to crush it. Careful, she says, so quiet only I can hear it. Not here. We do not shout. We do not walk out. We sit through the rest of the session like the vote did not happen, because that is what dignity looks like when you have no leverage, and when the gavel finally falls and the chamber empties, Laura stands, smooths her jacket, and walks out with her spine so straight it could have been drawn with a ruler. I write down the date before I do anything else. Some habits are older than reason. The walk back to the human delegation offices takes 11 minutes through the station's outer ring, past viewports that show half a dozen alien worlds hanging in the dark like ornaments nobody bothered to take down. Laura does not speak until we are inside, and the door has sealed behind us. Get me a secure line to Earth Defense Command, she says. Priority channel. Not the diplomatic one, the other one. The one we're not supposed to use unless, she agrees. I have worked for Laura Bennett for 3 years. I have seen her lose colonies to bureaucratic technicalities before. Watched her absorb insults dressed up as procedure. Watched her smile through meetings where delegates from species half our age treated humanity like a dog that had learned an impressive trick and was still, fundamentally, a dog. I have never seen her ask for the other channel. The connection takes 4 minutes to establish, bouncing through 3 relay stations before it lands on a secure terminal, somewhere under a mountain in what used to be called Colorado. The face that appears is not a diplomat. It is Colonel Grace Whitfield, Earth Defense Liaison, gray at the temples, eyes like a woman who has already heard the news and is waiting to hear how bad the delivery was. They took Verdance, Laura says. No greeting, no preamble. Whitfield's jaw tightens, just barely, the only visible reaction in an otherwise still face. On what grounds? A filing error, 11 years old. There is a silence on the line that stretches long enough for me to hear the station's ventilation hum behind it, some cold recycled air moving through ducts, 100 light-years from home. Whitfield looks past the camera at something or someone I cannot see, and when she looks back her voice has changed. It has gone flat and careful, the way people talk when they have already made a decision and are only now finding the words for it. Understood, she says. Ambassador, I need you to listen to me. And I need you not to repeat this to anyone in that building until you hear from the Prime Council directly. Can you do that? Grace, what is happening? I can't say more over this line, but I need you to trust me on one thing. Whitfield leans closer to the camera, and for a moment, I see something in her face that is not anger and is not fear, something older and colder than either. Whatever they do next up there, do not fight them for it. Do not beg. Do not negotiate. Just watch. The line goes dark before Laura can ask what that means. I do not sleep that night. I sit in the small human quarters section of the station, in a chair too narrow for the shoulders of half the species who designed this place, and I stare at a star chart on my terminal until the constellations blur into something meaningless. Somewhere on the other side of that chart, 40,000 people are packing up a world they were promised, and somewhere else, my own government is having a conversation it apparently does not trust me to hear. By morning, the station feels different, though nothing about it has physically changed. I notice it in the corridors first. A Farron trade envoy named Issa, who has shared coffee with me most mornings for 2 years, nods at me from across the concourse instead of stopping to talk. A group of Kates engineers, allies since the Second Contact Accords, cluster near the maintenance bay and go quiet when I pass. Nobody says a word against us. Nobody has to. I can feel 47 species doing the same silent arithmetic I did in the chamber yesterday, recalculating what humanity's word is worth now that the Council has shown, in public, exactly how little it costs to break it. I find the one delegate who still owes us something honest, a Kates war mother named Vresh, broad-shouldered and gray-skinned, a veteran of a border conflict where human Marines held a line that was not theirs to hold and did it anyway. She meets me in the station's lower gardens, where the plants are all foreign and the gravity is a fraction lighter than Earth standard, and she does not waste time on comfort. I cannot help you, she says. Not officially. My government voted with the majority. And unofficially? Vresh's 4 eyes narrow, an expression I have learned means something between shame and calculation. Unofficially, I would tell your ambassador to stop asking this council for fairness. It does not have any to give. It has 31 species who are tired of watching a 50-year-old civilization outpace one's 10 times its age, and it found a legal reason to clip your wings before you grew tall enough to matter. We're not trying to outpace anyone. You don't have to try, Vresh says. That is exactly the problem. I walk back to the delegation offices with that sentence sitting in my chest like a stone. When I arrive, Laura is standing at the window with a datapad in her hand, and her face has the particular stillness of someone who has just read something she cannot yet say out loud. Ethan, she says, send a message home, personal channel, not diplomatic, keep it short. What do I say? She looks at me for a long moment, and something in her expression tells me she already knows what is coming, even if she does not know the shape of it yet. Tell them we're still here, she says. 3 words, nothing more. I send it. I do not get a reply with speeches, or promises, or the careful diplomatic language I have spent 3 years learning to write. I get silence. Not the ordinary silence of a slow relay or a busy office. A specific silence, humming and total. The kind that only exists when everyone on the other end has already stopped arguing and started moving. I spend the next day trying to act normal, which is its own kind of exhausting work. I attend a routine trade subcommittee meeting where a Farron delegate spends 40 minutes discussing grain tariffs, as though the previous day's vote never happened, and I nod along and take notes I will never read again, because the alternative is sitting in a room full of people pretending nothing is wrong, while my own mind will not stop replaying the moment the vote counter turned red. I find Laura in the archive room that afternoon, somewhere she almost never goes, pulling old treaty documents onto a display screen, with the careful, methodical patience of someone building a case she has not yet decided whether she will ever need to present. I ask her what she is looking for. Precedent, she says, without looking up. Every time a member species was disciplined under Statute 4-12, going back to when it was written, I want to know how many times it has ever been used against a founding member in its first decade of membership. And? 0, she says. Until yesterday. I sit with her for 2 hours, pulling records, cross-referencing case files translated from 4 different council languages, and by the end of it we have a spreadsheet that says, in numbers no one in that chamber can argue with, that humanity was treated differently from every species that came before it. Laura does not say much when we finish. She simply closes the file, saves it somewhere I suspect only she can access, and tells me to go get some rest. I do not rest. I go back to my quarters and stare at the ceiling, and think about Vresh's warning in the garden, about a council that has no fairness left to give, and I wonder what a species does when the institution meant to protect it has quietly decided it no longer has to bother. 2 days later, I understand what that silence was building toward, and by then, it is already far, far too late for the council to take the vote back. Nobody on the station notices the withdrawal begin. That is the part that stays with me longest, looking back. There is no announcement, no dramatic broadcast, no fleet of human ships lighting up the sensor grid in some grand and furious exit. It starts instead with a maintenance technician named Owen Marsh, who works 2 decks below the human offices, keeping the station's aging life support arrays running, quietly informing his shift supervisor that his contract has been recalled, effective immediately, and that he will be gone within the hour. I only know this because Owen stops by my office on his way to the shuttle bay to return a coffee mug he borrowed 3 weeks ago. He is calm. He is almost cheerful, in the way people get when a long uncertainty has finally resolved into a clear instruction. Recalled how? I ask him. Recalled by who? Earth Defense, he says. Priority order. This morning. Every human technical staff on every Allied station. Effective immediate. I'm not the only one, Ethan. Check the manifest boards. I check the manifest boards. He is not the only one. By midday, 4 of the 6 human engineers maintaining the station's water reclamation system have already departed on the noon transport. By evening, the 2 remaining have handed in resignation notices with a departure date of tomorrow morning. I walk the lower engineering decks and count the empty stations, the tool lockers standing open and half emptied, the shift boards with human names crossed off in neat, unhurried handwriting, and I understand that this is not chaos. This is an operation. Somewhere, someone planned this to the hour. Laura calls an emergency meeting of the full delegation staff that night. 12 of us crowded into a briefing room built for 6. She does not sit at the head of the table. She stands, because standing is easier when you are about to say something you have not fully accepted yourself. As of 0600 station time tomorrow, she says, every human civilian contractor, technician, medical officer, and support staff currently serving aboard Allied installations has been recalled to Earth or Earth-controlled space. This includes personnel at Meridian Station, the Vareth Drift Relay Network, the Osun Medical Exchange Program, and 11 other posts across Council territory. Someone near the back, a junior trade attaché named Inez Calloway, asks the question all of us are thinking. Is this a declaration of war? No, Laura says. It's worse. Nobody argues with that. I think all of us, in that room, are already starting to see the shape of it, the way you see the shape of a held breath, a half-second before someone lets it out. I do not fully understand what humanity has been quietly holding together until I watch it come apart in real time. It starts with the medbay on Meridian's 3rd ring, where a rotating team of human doctors has spent 6 years running a treatment program for a wasting illness that strikes Osun children in their first year of life, a program built on a genetic therapy no other species in the Council ever managed to develop. I stand in the observation gallery on the morning the last human doctor departs and watch an Osun administrator argue, quietly, and then less quietly, with an empty room, because there is no one left to argue with. The machines are still there. The knowledge to run them correctly is not. It continues in the debris field along the Vareth Drift, a hazardous shipping lane that human engineers mapped and flagged over 4 years of unpaid, unglamorous survey work no other species had the patience or the sensor technology to finish. I hear about the first incident secondhand, from Vresh, 3 days after the withdrawal begins. A Kates supply convoy, following outdated charts because the human survey team that used to update them weekly is gone, loses 2 ships to a rock field that should have been marked and was not. Nobody frames it as our fault. That is the strange, cold horror of it. We did not attack anyone. We did not sabotage anything. We simply stopped being generous, and the galaxy discovers, all at once, and in 100 small ways, how much of its daily functioning had been quietly propped up by a species it voted to humiliate for a filing error. I watch it happen from the inside of the one institution designed to notice everything and understand nothing. The Council convenes an emergency session 4 days after the withdrawal begins, and for the first time in 3 years, humanity's seats in the chamber are not the ones being lectured. Thelvorin opens the session with something close to bewilderment in his careful, precise voice. We are receiving reports of coordinated departures by human personnel across 17 separate installations. Ambassador Bennett, can you clarify the nature of this action? Laura stands. She has had 4 days to decide exactly how to answer this question, and I can tell from the set of her shoulders that she has landed on something simple. There is no action to clarify, she says. Individual contracts have concluded. Individual personnel have returned home. That is all. All at once? Across every Allied post? Coincidence of timing, Laura says, and does not blink. A murmur runs through the chamber. 46 species trying to decide whether they are being lied to or told the truth, and failing to find a difference that matters. Thelvorin's gray eyes settle on Laura for a long moment, and something in his expression tells me he understands exactly what is happening and cannot find a statute to charge it under, because there is no law against a people simply going home. The Council notes, he says finally, with some concern, the sudden absence of human technical and medical contributions across several critical programs. The Council, Laura says, voted 4 days ago that a filing error from 11 years past was sufficient grounds to strip 40,000 human colonists of their home. I would ask the Council not to be surprised that a people treated as disposable in one context might, in another, simply decline to be indispensable. Nobody claps. Nobody in that chamber would dare show something as undignified as approval or alarm in open session. But I watch 3 delegates from smaller member species glance toward each other, and I understand that Laura's sentence has just traveled further and faster than any speech she has ever given in 3 years of careful diplomacy. The session ends without resolution, because there is nothing to resolve. No law was broken. No threat was made. And yet I walk back to the delegation offices past a knot of anxious engineers from 4 different species, arguing in low voices about who is going to reroute the Vareth Drift shipping lanes now, and I understand, for the first time, that my ambassador has just done something no fleet of warships could have accomplished in a single afternoon. She has made the galaxy afraid of an empty room. That night I do not sleep again, but this time it is not dread keeping me awake. It is something closer to disbelief, watching a plan unfold that I was never told about, realizing that the silence I sent home 4 days ago was not confusion, it was permission. Earth had already decided what it was going to do. It was only waiting to see if we would ask them not to. We did not ask. And now, 6 decks below me, the last human maintenance crew on Meridian Station packs the final crate of tools onto a departing shuttle, and somewhere far behind them, an entire species that the Council spent 3 years calling too young to matter begins, very quietly, to matter more than it ever has before. The weeks that follow move slower than the days that preceded them, which surprises me, because I expected the opposite. I expected collapse to feel like falling. Instead, it feels like watching a tide go out, patient and total, exposing things that were always underwater and always ignored, because nobody had reason to look. Meridian Station empties of human presence almost completely. Laura keeps a skeleton diplomatic staff, 6 of us including myself, because a treaty obligation requires a seated delegate in the chamber, and Laura will not give the Council the satisfaction of an empty chair. Everyone else is gone. The corridors that used to carry the accents of a dozen Earth regions now carry only the clipped, formal Council standard speech of species who never learned to be comfortable around us, and now, without us here, do not have to try. I spend my mornings reading reports that arrive through the diplomatic channel, each one a small window into a much larger unraveling. A colony in the Asun Protectorate, dependent for 2 years on human-supplied water purification technology, begins strict rationing when the last human technician departs and the local engineers discover that the purification arrays were never fully documented in any language but English. A fleet exercise along the Kates border is delayed for 3 weeks because the joint tactical simulations, run for a decade on human-designed software, cannot be operated by anyone who understands the underlying code. None of these are attacks. None of these are sabotage. They are simply the shape of absence, spreading outward from 100 small places where humanity had quietly made itself necessary and never once been thanked for it. I ask Laura, one evening in the emptied delegation offices, whether this was the plan all along. Whether Earth Defense had been preparing this withdrawal for longer than 4 days. She considers the question with the same careful stillness she brings to everything. I don't think it was a plan, she says. I think it was a threshold. We've been generous with this council for 50 years, Ethan. Filing extensions, technology sharing, medical exchange. All of it offered freely. Most of it never once reciprocated. I think somewhere in Earth Defense there has been a line drawn for a long time, and Verdance finally crossed it. And now what happens? Now, Laura says, we find out whether the council can survive without something it never bothered to value. I think about Vresh's words in the garden, weeks ago now. You don't have to try. That is exactly the problem. I think the council spent 50 years measuring humanity by how fast we were catching up, and never once measured what we were quietly holding up while we did it. The first delegation arrives on Meridian, 11 days into the withdrawal, and it is not a council delegation. It is a Kates trade envoy, unofficial, arriving without the usual pageantry of a diplomatic visit, requesting a private meeting with Ambassador Bennett within an hour of docking. Vresh is among them, and when she steps into our office, her 4 eyes find mine first, before Laura's, and there is something in her expression that looks almost like an apology. We are not here on behalf of the council, the lead envoy says, a narrow, formal Kates elder named Dresk. We are here on behalf of the Kates Assembly, which has authorized me to request the resumption of human technical support for the Vareth Drift Survey Program, under whatever terms your government requires. Whatever terms, Laura repeats. Whatever terms, Dresk says again, and I watch the words cost him something. We have lost 4 ships and 9 crew in 3 weeks. To hazards your survey teams would have flagged within a day. The Assembly does not care what the Council votes. The Assembly cares that our people are dying because a resource we relied on was withdrawn over a dispute that was never ours. Laura is quiet for a long moment. I know her well enough to recognize what that silence means. She is not deciding what to say. She is deciding how much of the truth to give. I will pass your request to Earth Defense Command, she says finally. But I want to be honest with you, Elder Dresk. In a way the Council has never once been honest with us. This is not a negotiation Earth intends to lose. If technical support resumes, it resumes on terms that reflect what that support is actually worth, not what a council statute decided it should be worth 11 years ago. Dresk's throat pouch flexes. A Kates gesture I have learned means something between resignation and respect. The Assembly understands, he says. The Assembly should have understood it sooner. When the envoys leave, Vresh lingers a moment longer than the others, and she says something to me quietly, in the doorway, meant for no one else. You did not do this, she says. Not you personally, but I want you to know, I am glad someone finally did. I do not know what to say to that, so I say nothing, and she leaves, and I sit with the strange weight of being thanked for something I only watched happen. 3 more delegations arrive over the following 2 weeks, each one unofficial, each one carrying some version of the same request, wrapped in whatever pride its species can still afford. A Farron agricultural consortium, whose crop yields on 2 colony worlds have dropped sharply since human-designed soil analysis drones went dark. An Osun Medical Council, quietly desperate, no longer able to pretend the wasting illness treatment program can continue without the doctors who built it. Even a scientific institute from a species I have never once seen at the negotiating table before, distant and reclusive, sending a single representative who says almost nothing and simply hands Laura a data crystal containing what I later learn is a formal offer of trade concessions humanity has been requesting, unsuccessfully, for 6 years. Laura takes each meeting with the same measured patience, and turns each one away with the same answer. Send your request through the council. Let the record show exactly what is being asked, and exactly what it costs to ask it. I ask her, after the 3rd delegation, why she insists on the council record, when the unofficial approach would clearly be faster. Because speed isn't the point, she says. The council voted, in public, on the record, that our word and our contributions were worth nothing more than a filing technicality. I want the correction on the same record. I want every species in that chamber to watch, in writing, exactly how much they were willing to pay in private for something they voted to throw away in public. I understand, watching her say it, that Laura Bennett is not simply managing a diplomatic crisis. She is building an argument, patiently, one humiliated envoy at a time, and she intends to deliver its conclusion in the one room where it will hurt the most to hear. Not every visitor who comes to our door in those weeks arrives asking for help. On the 18th day, a Farron delegate named Corin Vass, one of the 6 who voted in humanity's favor at the original session, requests a private audience that has nothing to do with technical cooperation at all. He is younger than most council delegates, sharp-eyed, and when he sits across from Laura in our cramped office, he does not bother with the usual formalities. "I want to understand something," he says. "You could have fought the vote, filed an appeal, called for review, brought the case to the full assembly. Instead, you sent your people home and said nothing. Why?" Laura considers the question longer than she considers most. "Because an appeal asks the council to agree it was wrong," she says. "That was never going to happen through argument. Statute 4-12 was legal, technically defensible, and completely unjust, and there is no courtroom in this station built to weigh those 3 things fairly. So we stopped asking the council to be fair, and we let it discover, on its own schedule, exactly what unfairness costs." Corin is quiet for a moment. "That is either the wisest thing I have heard in this chamber in a decade," he says, "or the most dangerous. I have not decided which." "It can be both," Laura says. "Most true things are." He leaves without another word, but I notice, in the weeks that follow, that he is the first delegate to publicly call for a full review of Statute 4-12 on the council floor, 3 days before the emergency session is even scheduled. I do not think that visit was an accident. I think Laura has been building this argument in more rooms than I realized, one careful, unhurried conversation at a time, letting each listener believe they arrived at the conclusion on their own. The summons comes on the 23rd day of the withdrawal. An emergency session of the full council, formally requested by no fewer than 9 member species, all of them asking for the same thing on the agenda, a review of Council Statute 4-12, and a formal address from the human delegation regarding the terms under which technical cooperation might resume. Laura reads the summons twice, sets it down, and looks at me with something that is almost, but not quite, a smile. "Get my formal robes," she says, "the dark ones. And Ethan, I want you seated beside me this time, not behind me, beside me." "Why?" "Because you were there for the vote that started this," she says. "You should be there for the one that ends it." I spend that night rereading the transcript of the original vote, the one I watched from the doorway with a burning cup of coffee in my hand. 41 votes against and 6 in favor, and I think about how small that chamber felt that day, how certain every delegate in it seemed that humanity would simply absorb the insult and keep offering its hand. I think about Owen Marsh returning a coffee mug on his way to the shuttle bay, calm and almost cheerful, carrying out an order that would, within 3 weeks, bring 9 species to our door with their pride in their hands. I think about Vresh in the garden, telling me the council had no fairness left to give, and I wonder whether she understood, even then, that fairness was never going to be the thing that changed its mind. Leverage was. I do not sleep well that night, but for the first time since the vote, the thing keeping me awake is not dread. I spend the early hours before the session going over old files instead, the way some people pace and some people pray. I pull up the original human application for council membership, filed 51 years ago by delegates who are all long dead now. Men and women who wrote paragraph after careful paragraph explaining why a young, unglamorous species deserved a seat at a table built by civilizations 10,000 years older. I remember reading it as a student and feeling embarrassed by how hard it tried. Reading it now, I feel something closer to grief for how little that effort was ever repaid. There is a line near the end of the application that I had forgotten until tonight. We do not ask to be trusted immediately. We ask only to be given the chance to earn it. I think about that line for a long time in the dark of the delegation office, and I think about Owen Marsh whistling while he packed his tools, and about Laura closing my hand around a coffee cup so I would not crush it in front of a room that was waiting for exactly that kind of mistake. 51 years of earning trust, 1 filing extension and 1 shared medical breakthrough at a time, and it took the council 11 minutes to decide none of it mattered. I fall asleep an hour before the session is scheduled to begin, and I dream, absurdly, of the coffee cup, still whole in my hand, steam rising off it in a chamber that is otherwise completely silent. The council chamber looks different when you walk into it already knowing you are not the one who has to explain yourself. Laura moves through the entrance with the same measured pace she always uses, but I notice, walking beside her instead of behind her for the first time in 3 years, that the room notices her differently today. Delegates who once glanced past our small human seating cluster now watch her cross the floor, and the watching has a different weight to it than the pity or the polite dismissal I grew used to. It looks, if I am honest, almost like fear, though none of them would ever use that word for it. Speaker Thelvorin opens the session with none of his usual careful ceremony. He looks tired, gray around his pale eyes in a way I have never seen before, and when he speaks, his voice has lost the practiced smoothness that used to make bad news sound almost reasonable. This emergency session was requested by 9 member species, he says, each citing significant operational harm resulting from the withdrawal of human technical and medical support across Council territory. The Council has agreed to hear a formal address from the human delegation on the conditions under which this support might resume. He looks at Laura. Ambassador Bennett, the floor is yours. Laura stands. She does not rush. I have learned, over 3 years at her side, that she treats silence the way a surgeon treats a scalpel, and she lets this one stretch, just long enough for every delegate in the chamber to lean forward without realizing they have done it. 23 days ago, she says, this council voted, 41-6, to strip the human colony of Verdance of its charter over an administrative filing error corrected more than a decade ago. That vote was framed, at the time, as a minor technical matter. I would like the record to reflect what it has actually cost. She gestures, and the chamber's central display fills with a list, longer than I expected even after having helped compile it. Colonies rationing water, fleets delayed by unmapped hazards, a wasting illness returning to children whose treatment program went dark, trade routes closed for lack of a survey no other species had the patience to finish. None of this, Laura says, was an act of aggression. My government did not fire a single weapon, did not break a single law, did not violate a single treaty obligation. We simply exercised our right to allocate our own people and our own resources as we saw fit. And in doing so, this council has learned something it apparently did not know about itself. It has learned exactly how much of its daily functioning was quietly held together by a species it was prepared to discard over a paperwork error. A murmur moves through the chamber, and Thelvorin raises a hand for order, though I notice he does not look angry. He looks like a man watching a bill arrive that he always suspected was coming, and hoped, against reason, never would. Ambassador, he says, the Council is prepared to discuss reinstatement of the Verdance Charter and terms for resumption of technical cooperation. What does Earth require? Laura's answer is not long. I expected, given everything that led to this room, a list of demands, concessions extracted with the same patience she applied to every envoy who came to our office over the past 3 weeks. Instead, she says something simpler, and it lands harder for its simplicity. We require the Council to understand what it almost lost, she says, and to stop assuming it can never lose it again. Verdance's charter will be reinstated, fully, without further review, or human technical cooperation will not resume under any terms this Council can offer. That is not a negotiation. That is a condition. The silence that follows is different from every other silence I have sat through in this chamber. It is not the polite, procedural pause before a vote. It is the specific quiet of 46 species, doing the same arithmetic at once, weighing pride against necessity, and finding necessity heavier than it has ever felt before. Thelvorin does not call for a vote immediately. He looks at Laura for a long moment, and something passes between them that I do not fully understand until later, some old and weary recognition between two people who have spent their careers managing the same impossible room from opposite sides. The chair recognizes, he says finally, that the Council's judgment on Statute 4-12, as applied in this instance, may have been in error. It is the closest thing to an apology I will ever hear cross that floor, and Laura accepts it with a small, precise nod, the kind that costs nothing and concedes nothing, and yet somehow closes the matter completely. The vote to reinstate Verdance's charter passes 44-3, 23 days after the vote that took it away passed 41-6. I do not think the difference is really about the charter at all. I think it is about the empty maintenance decks, the darkened med bays, the unmapped debris fields, and every quiet, unglamorous contribution humanity made for 50 years that nobody thought to value until it was gone. After the session, delegates I have never spoken to approach our small human cluster with a kind of careful, formal warmth, offering congratulations that sound more like relief than celebration. Vresh finds me near the chamber doors, her 4 eyes bright with something that might be pride. "I told you the council had no fairness left to give," she says. "I did not expect it to find some, this quickly, once it understood the alternative." "It wasn't fairness," I say. "It was arithmetic." Vresh's throat pouch flexes in something like a laugh. "With this council," she says, "it is usually one or the other." I am glad, this time, it was the one that worked. I walk back through the station that evening past corridors, slowly filling again with familiar accents, human engineers, and doctors and technicians beginning to return under new agreements. Ones negotiated this time with the full weight of what their absence had cost written into every clause. Owen Marsh is among the first back, unpacking his tools in the same maintenance bay he left 3 weeks ago, whistling something old and tuneless while he works, as though nothing at all unusual has happened. I find Laura in our office late that night, reviewing the terms of the new technical cooperation agreements, and I ask her the question that has been sitting in my chest since the vote that started all of this, weeks ago now. "Did you know," I ask, "when you sent that 3-word message home, that this is where it would end?" She looks up from the datapad, and for a moment, her careful diplomatic composure slips into something more tired, more human, more honest than I have seen from her in 3 years. "No," she says, "I knew we were done asking to be treated fairly. I did not know what would happen once we stopped asking. I don't think anyone did. Not even Earth Defense, not fully. I think we all just decided, at the same time, in different rooms, that the answer to being told we didn't matter was to prove, quietly and without a single shot fired, exactly how much we did." I think about the vote counter turning red before I even sat down, 23 days and a lifetime ago. I think about Vresh in the garden telling me the council had no fairness to give, and about 9 species standing outside our door weeks later, with their pride in their hands, asking for the very thing they had voted to throw away. I think about a filing error, 11 years old, and how something so small became the thread that unraveled a 50-year assumption the whole galaxy had made, about who needed whom. The galaxy never feared a human fleet. It never needed to. What it feared, in the end, and what it is only now beginning to understand, is what happens when a quiet, generous, endlessly underestimated people finally stop bothering to be needed and simply go home instead. We did not walk away from peace that day in the chamber. We walked away from being taken for granted, and in doing so, we taught an entire council what peace had actually been costing us all along.